Hey everyone, welcome back to Flywheel. I'm your host, DeFi Dave. I'm here with capital K, as well as our wonderful, one-of-a-kind producer, Sam McCullough. I don't know if I messed up your name or not, but sorry. How do I pronounce your last name?
So it's like Scottish, but it's, like in Scotland they do like a loch, it's like McCulloch, but yeah, it was fine.
Okay.
Loch, like that guttural sound that we don't have in American English.
Sam McCullough. I'm just gonna do that.
That works.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And this week, this episode, we're trying something a little bit new. We are actually going to break down Flywheel's resident author, Bobby J Shilla's institutional pieces. And the reason why we're doing this is we actually, we want to think of ways to produce more content within the Frax ecosystem. We want to increase our output at Flywheel. And we think this is a good way to start. And I'm really excited for this, especially knowing Bobby and knowing what his goals are in future posts. I think this first post, creating a framework to evaluate automated stablecoins, is a great place to start. How are you guys feeling about this?
I thought it was a really nice article, and I'm excited to get into it.
Same.
Yeah. What do you guys think of the new Flywheel expanding in content from the interviews to breaking down pieces within the Frax ecosystem?
I think it's really necessary. I mean, part of the reason that we wanted to have this is that we're producing some great institutional content, and not everybody that writes this stuff wants to come on and break it down, so we can get in there and do it for them. So it's really nice to have some other contributors to Flywheel. We have a big pool that's here now, and I'm really excited to see what they're going to be producing over the next few months.
Agreed. I like the different format, the content type, right? We have the audio one, and now we have some written stuff. So I think we're really appealing to, all the audience out there.
Yeah. And, one of my favorite quotes is, the medium is the message. And you can tell, the way that, these articles are written, they're very dense and they're very deep, and they're meant to be digested over, I think, and thought about over a long period of time. Meanwhile, with the podcast, I think they're really easy to get a taste of everything. And I know when I listen to podcasts, I don't absorb everything at once. Sometimes it takes me a few different listens to absorb stuff, but sometimes you just get clips in your head. But with I feel with institutional writing like this, you're really building a case, while with podcasts it's really just an introduction to something. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So in his introduction, Bobby kind of sets the stage here with the US dollar, saying how in 1971 the dollar was on the gold standard. It was redeemable with some equivalent in gold. And then there was this transition once, Nixon was like, all right, screw the gold standard, we're going off of it. And we went from being a hard backing to a soft backing. And I kind of view the reason, behind this is I think the economy just got too big and was growing too fast to be held down and anchored by some rock in the ground. That just wasn't going to cut it anymore. And so it just made a lot more sense to peg it to, I guess, as Bobby puts it, the cash flows of a given economy. And that really set the stage for, for better or for worse, the world that we live in today. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think if you look at the gold standard, one of the bigger reasons is that because the disparities between the two currencies, or just any currencies, right? As the global reserve currency, it's always going to be the kind of the gold standard, like everybody said. But in these non-US currencies that would exist, they could deflate their currencies and then swap it for dollars, and then essentially swap it for gold, which put extreme pressure on the dollar itself, and essentially drove Nixon to move off the backing. So, I mean, it was the right thing to do at the time, since everybody else was moving to a soft backing as well too. And it's worked out just fine for us.
Yeah, agreed. And then I think except until recently when we do the infinite mint bug, right? The infinite mint bug for the fiat currency that we obviously can't do in crypto. So let's dive in a bit deeper into how Bobby kind of lays down the different collateralization type and things like that.
Yeah, and I think before we get into that, I think the most important concept when it comes to money is faith. Like money, ultimately, like I guess like the layer zero of money is just having faith in it. And actually, I know it's like having faith in it and knowing that like, okay, this will be worth something. I know I'll be able to go and exchange for goods or for services. I know that I will be able to save in this. Like that faith is just like so foundational. Like it's pretty much religious in a sense. It's basically like in a sense, like almost, you know, that's why I kind of view just like, and how people view money as God. It's just because like that people's like lives just like run on it. And so just like faith is like the layer zero of money. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think that's fair, but I just don't feel like, should that translate over to crypto though? Whereas,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But go ahead.
Okay. Because I think maybe you don't need to rely so much on quote faith or too much on faith, because you can kind of check the chain and kind of see all the assets backing. And sure, you need to be a bit more sophisticated in order to sleuth out the contracts and pull out all the values and such. But I think it really minimizes faith as much as it can.
Let
Right.
me, let me like roll it back. By faith, I don't mean like, oh, let's have like everything being unbacked. Like, no, not at all. I'm just saying more like the US dollar as it is now, like, you know, it's, or like just like currency in general, is backed by faith. And like, there's different ways you can like earn that faith, like with cryptocurrencies, especially stable coins, it's collateral, like whether it's like being fully collateralized or over collateralized, or to an extent, you know, under collateralized, but like collateral or fully collateralized in other ways, as Bobby would put it.
Right.
Yeah. Sam, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the ability of the government to pay back their debt, right? So it's kind of at the base layer, and really you're talking about if you look at the how the dollar system works, right? It's all credit, right? Or pretty much all credit with some hard assets that back it up. And so when you're looking at these like dollar reserves or versus what's happening on crypto, you know, in the, I guess, TradFi system, most everything's done on faith, right? It's the ability of people to issue debt against the collateral that they have or that they don't have, but with the expected cash flows that are predicted to come into the future to pay back that debt. And you know, it's a bit more difficult in crypto because we don't have the ability to have any sort of like under collateralization without in like a trustless manner. That every asset or every piece of collateral that you have in crypto, if you're going to issue a loan against it, typically if you want to get paid back, you always have to be either over collateralized or fully collateralized. And so I think this is one of the things that he's getting into this article, is that Frax was the first system to come along and really make a partially collateralized, but fully backed, but partially collateralized dollar, which in theory only should be able to exist in a TradFi system, because like trustlessness and under collateralization don't really go hand in hand.
Yeah, they don't. It's kind of a paradox, but I feel like with Bobby, like nothing's ever truly under collateralized. It's always like backed by something, like whether it's like hard assets or cash flow, like, and that's what Bobby will get into. And so to get into the next section, enter stablecoins. And, you know, as we know, or for our viewers that are not familiar with how, you know, stablecoins have evolved in crypto, you know, the first one was Tether back in 2014, which was an omni chain, which is like funny to think about, like issued on like counterparty Bitcoin and stuff. But the idea behind Tether is basically there's cash in a bank or cash equivalents in a bank. And then, you know, equivalent of that is like on chain, and you can exchange it like one-to-one. You know, these, and that, you know, it's kind of funny seeing like where stablecoins, you know, are populated the most. Like Tether is like the stablecoin for centralized exchanges. USDC has become the stablecoin for DeFi. And also like regionally, you see it split up as well. Tether is the stablecoin for, you know, outside the US, especially in Asia, while USDC is mostly US based, especially with the way Circle is based in the US. But yeah, like central, I think, you know, I like to call it stablecoins kind of just actually no. What do you guys think of like centralized stablecoins so far?
I think they've come to fit a purpose that was driven by the market, right? If you look at Tether, what it was specifically trying to do was facilitate dollar access to mostly Asia, mostly Chinese and Asian crypto holders who wanted to have some sort of stable asset that they can move into or borrow and then leverage with for the trading. And because of their lack of access to, say, dollar-based accounts or dollar-based banks, it was easier for them to go out and scoop up Tether and just stay in that rather than have to deal with the American banking system and the regulations that go along with that. And the same thing for USD. I mean, USDC is the opposite, where like USDC is this like onshore dollar where it's, we can see all the reserves. I mean, USDC just published the like their reserves today with all the, I think, CUSIP numbers. USDC Bull is probably going to be retweeting about it heavily today.
Big blue coin.
Yeah. So like if you look at it, it kind of goes hand in hand with how our current dollar system is made up, where we have all this there's many different types of dollars. We have domestic dollars, there's like offshore dollars, and the USDC and USDT kind of fit in those same sort of modes. It's just they're tokens instead of loans or something that you would take from a bank.
I think they served an absolute need in that you don't want to hold volatile assets all the time, and now you have another option. Right back then, you kind of didn't. You either hold Bitcoin or you sold for cash on the central exchange, and then that's it. So I think this had offered another avenue for people to park their wealth and not exit crypto fully, so that bear markets are kind of easier to handle. And if anything, the clearest sign of adoption, if you just look at the stablecoin market cap of USDC, that thing was like up and to the right, up until only recently that it kind of went down a little bit. But that's the clearest sign of adoption.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think like the more everyday transactions that happen, not just in USDC, but in all stable coins, are like huge signs of adoption. Like I can't wait for the day that I can pay my bills in stable coins, especially Frax. Like I'd love that. And I think that will come eventually. It's just like the infrastructure and the rails need to develop for that. But I think just the frictionless of dealing with the chain. Like once it's hard to get on chain, but once you're on chain, like it's amazing how much faster it is and less friction there is than the traditional banking system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of those things where you're like, once you start to use it, it just makes a lot more sense. Like, oh, I want to send, $500 to Dave, who's in Portugal right now. And like, I don't need to do a bank transfer. Okay. I'll just send him some USDC and then he can figure out, or I'll send him some Frax and then he can figure out what to do with it later. Right. And then figure out like an off ramp, which makes sense for him inside of his local area, which from like an organic sense, just is a lot easier to deal with. Like if these payment channels that work at bigger scale for doing remittances or other things, I mean, they work really well. I mean, they're very regulated. They work really well. They have a high level of trust. And, I know that if I'm going to go use Western Union to send money to Argentina, it's going to get there. But at the same time, because of capital controls and other things, you may have limits, or you may not be able to send exactly what you want to send. And stablecoins make it available for anyone to do this, and I think that's the amazing thing about them.
And speaking of Argentina, I know like not just the stablecoin adoption rate there is like much higher than in other places. And I remember going down to ETH Rio and talking to a bunch of people from there, and it's because they have to they have to adapt, because there's in America. Right now, like we're experiencing high inflation, 9.1%, but they're like, oh, that's cute. Like 9.1%, like we deal with this all the time. And so like, it's a completely different situation. But that leads me into the next stablecoin I want to get into is DAI, which is a over collateralized stablecoin, and was the first attempt to create like, okay, like instead of having reserves off chain, what if we have all the reserves on chain to start off with? And, for viewers at home that are not sure how DAI works, basically you take 100, for example's sake, you can take $150 worth of ETH, let's say you don't want to sell it, but like you want to like go and buy more ETH or go want to pay your bills, like, and you use that $150 worth of ETH, create a vault, a CDP vault, and then from that you can generate up to $100 worth of DAI. And with that, you can, go do whatever you want. You just have to make sure you don't get liquidated, because that's not fun. It's not fun. But I thought, DAI was a really and still is like a really novel attempt to say like, okay, like what if we could create money independent from the traditional banking system? And what would a decentralized stablecoin would look like? And like what I like love and respect about Maker is how they paved the way for all of DeFi. Like a lot of the smart contracts we all like love and use on a daily basis today, the Maker guys had to write that from scratch. Like there was no DeFi. Like they literally had to write everything, even from like Oracle things to like different things here and there. Like they were true trailblazers and whatnot. And it's interesting seeing like how they evolve with like their governance, from going from like DAO to foundation back to DAO, and seeing everything they're trying to do with real world assets and whatnot. So what are your guys' thoughts on MakerDAO and Dai?
I'll start first for this one. I think it was a great initial design space for a stable coin that is fully on chain, and they really did what they could with the assets they had, right? And they first almost like introduced the idea that, hey, ETH could possibly be this store of value. Hey, ETH is not just what you pay for gas. You could actually mint other assets, and it can actually back other assets. So it really changed the paradigm of ETH for, I think, a lot of people, myself included. Because initially when I was using, Ethereum back in 2017, I was like, wouldn't it be cooler if there was like some kind of middleware where right before I execute a transaction, it would just buy some ETH for me and then pay for the gas, and then I can just go off and do what I do. So I never really hold ETH at all. So seeing Maker, facilitate ETH as a CDP vault, I can mint against it. I think that really changed the paradigm for me. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, it's interesting to see DAI's evolution over the past couple of years, right? So from originally like single asset Ethereum only DAI, where it was very cool what they were doing, but at the same time, the peg had really volatile for a stablecoin.
Yeah.
I mean, you go back and you look at those early charts of DAI, and it was just all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Like in stressful times when people were like having to buy back DAI to pay back their loans, I mean, they could pay even like a 10 or 15% premium at times. It was really, really crazy. So with the addition of multi-collateral DAI, which we have now, the peg's been able to be kept really tight, but at the same time, it's led to them kind of losing the majority share that they had of it being ETH and it being mostly USDC now. And so, it's accomplishing specific things, and they have a really smart team over there. But it seems like they've moved off into a different type of design space, and are looking at different things now.
And that's
versus where they were. Yeah,
that's especially true with the real world assets and their efforts they're trying to make there. Because once you go off chain, you're dealing with a whole different world with a whole different rules and whole different regulations than if you're dealing with the world purely on chain with smart contracts. And we're still like early and like paving the way forward. And I feel like real world assets is going to be figured out. It's just like a matter of how. And it's interesting seeing on the Frax forum like all the different proposals for real world assets on there as well. But it's just like a matter. I know Sam's philosophy is let's try to be 100% on chain. Like everything has to like come, the chain is the base, like the real world assets have to come to us, like not the other way around. There's no like
I think that the RWA stuff is really interesting because it can allow for, I mean, there's just so much cool design space that's available for the RWAs and what they're able to do and how you fit stablecoins in there. So just like think, for example, let's say you have like some property, like you have $1 million of real estate, right? So in that part, let's say it's some commercial stuff and you're earning like 8% a year. In that one piece of real estate, you have like a collateral portion, which is the token, but then you also have like a yield portion as well too, which can be represented through some sort of like future asset or future yield that you're going to get from the rent that comes into that asset. So like what you could do in DeFi is you could split off those two things. You could have the collateral backing, which you could borrow against, or somebody could, give you a loan, or you could do some interesting things with. But then in addition, you have this like yield at the same time as well too, that maybe somebody wants to give you a loan for your future yield, right? And so I think there's a lot of like things that Frax can explore with these RWAs that are coming in. Maybe they provide loans on the collateral, maybe they just provide upfront loans on the yield that's coming in. I don't know. I mean, this is something that a lot of really smart people are building.
Especially with Fraxland
Yeah.
coming out soon. It'll be very interesting what custom term sheet agreements come out of there.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to see how all this RWA stuff. I mean, it's like securitization is the next step for everything. So I guess this kind of leads into the next part of the article, where he really gets into kind of the meat of it, of trying to understand if we're not dealing with over collateralized stablecoins or just some sort of like wrapper for USDC, and we're actually talking about what's needed for DeFi and needed for crypto. Really, we need to have a partially collateralized stablecoin to succeed, Bobby writes, which I think we all fully agree with. There's just something about, like, this is something that Sam talks about, is that the ability to have all of our reserves on chain and to understand them through math allows us to find the I guess soundness of the entire protocol at all times, right? So we can be partially collateralized because we see everything all the time. And if we didn't have that access, then you have gaps and you have to start to price in that, and then the peg can break because people don't understand. People aren't able to efficiently and transparently price that risk.
Yeah, what do you think, Kiet?
For me, I think partial collateralization is a slight misnomer.
I was about to say that too.
It scares people more than it
doesn't do good for the faith.
Exactly.
It doesn't do good for the faith part. What do you mean partial collateralized?
Yeah. What is partial? It's not. It's just collateralized by different things. So I would rather say, instead of partial collateralization, I would say like diverse collateralization or something to that effect.
Diverse. I like that.
Because it's collateralized by the asset, and it's collateralized by the cash flows, which is an asset, right?
Yeah.
And then the thing is, the part where you could start becoming partial is the discount rate that you would apply for all future cash flows and what you would expect those cash flows to be like. So I really like what Bobby said here. I guess I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it's about the sustainable and the sustainable and accurate and organic revenue and cash flows, rather than what we saw during kind of like the bull market of emission tokens left and right. You can't include another protocol's user acquisition marketing spend as your outright cash flow. Like, that's just silly.
Yeah. So, but like you were saying here, I mean, let's say you have an asset like Frax, right? And they're able to make 6% on their assets. Like, how would you price that? What kind of collateral ratio would you give that then? If they can make 6% in perpetuity, there has to be some sort of discount rate that you can apply to it and come to an okay number that you're being very conservative with, that you would be okay with holding this dollar pegged asset. And the great thing is that we can easily build models for this and come to a pretty well thought out conclusions across the entire space. It's not like trying to figure out a valuation metrics for like Bitcoin or like Ethereum or something like that, where it's much more opaque and you're having to think about network effects and what this means for all the apps that are running on it. No, this is a simple, we look at the balance sheet, we look at how much is being lended out, like what the yield on the assets that we have already is, and then you can just plug it in and apply typical DCF models to it, which makes it a really easy thing to take a look at and understand.
Yeah, I'm excited about, what AMOs that Frax will come out with in the future. I mean, this past like year and a half of development from V1 of Frax, which was just a simple ARB minting and redeeming, not really using the USDC collateral in any way. V2 of Frax, putting that collateral to work all across DeFi, most notably Curve, Convex, but also, you had some in Aave, you had some even in Yearn. And it really showed like, oh, like this, what is possible with stablecoins, like on chain. It's like, yes, you can like do these activities on chain. And what's cool about, like, I like to describe to people that, this Frax uses the protocols themselves to maintain its peg, while, when you over collateralize with Maker or Dai, for example, like let's say there was like a CDP vault that took CRV tokens. And so you would over collateralize the CRV tokens in order to generate DAI. Meanwhile, with Frax, what Frax does instead, it uses the Curve protocol itself and, injects the USDC that's, idle, and also mints new Frax to create, the three pool tokens that are back, and that liquidity is backing Frax. And that is what's helping maintain its peg primarily. So, and not only that, but like it gets like fees from the Curve pool, and also, it gets, vote incentives, it gets all these different things. So it was a very interesting model, and it was very forward thinking of Sam to, spot Curve and Convex early on. And now you can see this, I call it the confederation that has formed between Curve, Convex, and Frax, with the recent Frax BP passing. 8 different stablecoins now are going to be pegged with Frax BP, and also Frax getting whitelisted on CRV. Now, in a sense, like all these protocols are like closer together. So what are your guys' thoughts on the AMOs, and what are your guys' thoughts on Frax BP and how Curve, Convex, and Frax have gotten closer together?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that what you were saying, it's like Frax's success is not dependent on the collateral assets that it has. Rather, it's dependent on the protocols that it's integrated with. And I think that if DeFi is, if you think DeFi is going to succeed, then Frax has to be a central core part of that. Like there's no other options, right? It's if Yearn is going to do well, if Convex is going to do well, if Curve is going to do well, and then not just, these are the ones that we know about. Like what's coming next year, what's coming 5 years in the future. Like if Frax can use its ability to create new AMOs, mint Frax, and put it into these protocols, so long as it doesn't affect the peg, and use it as a tool to gain a huge foothold in these projects. What like how many other projects are we going to be able to influence and essentially take over in the future? You think about like even things which don't even have a token, right? Like you think about something like Lightning Network or something like that, or like something where it's just a huge amount of liquidity is needed to facilitate transactions back and forth, and it just generates yield based on the payments. Like Frax could create $1 billion and put it into Lightning Network if that becomes the kind of general way of making dollar-based payments in DeFi in the future, right? Or if like Starkware, like any of these new networks that are coming, any new DeFi protocol that's coming, Frax now has the ability to just own it from day one. And I think that is super powerful. It's just something that gets overlooked, right? We have the brightest minds in the space making these new AMOs, which we could make AMOs for anything, literally anything, and they're going to generate yield, and that yield is going to go back to Frax. So if crypto and DeFi is going to succeed, then Frax is going to be right there along with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just having Frax as the central bank of DeFi and being able to, enact monetary policy and basically mint currency is extremely powerful. I'm not sure if I would use the word own. I like the idea of thinking of things in more of a positive some way, just like working together with protocols in an equal way. And like, I think what a lot of protocols struggle with is liquidity and currency. And like Frax is there to bootstrap that. And then like the combination of like whatever that protocol is doing novel and better than everyone else, combined with, that initial injection of liquidity and capital is, really positive sum for all of DeFi.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think of it as more a zone. I mean, I was thinking more in the sense of like the ability of Frax to have like governance decisions, right? But it's more about laying the foundation of, like when you look at how cities work, right? There's an electrical grid that provides power to everything. There's water that, provides for sanitation and drinking water. And Frax is essentially going to be like that utility, like that base utility that everybody needs it. And if you're gonna have a new business in DeFi and you're gonna start up, okay, well, you got to have Frax, you got to integrate with Baseball, you got to do all these things, you got to go apply to get a gauge spot on Frax. Like all these things are just going to be like the kind of the base. What do I need? What's the first thing that I need to do to get into DeFi question for any protocol that's going to come in the future?
Yeah.
I have this idea of I really like what Dave said that I think there was maybe like pod number 1 or something. He was like, you have Tether, which services the central exchanges. You have USDC, which is the fiat off ramp. And then you have Frax, which is the go-to DeFi stablecoin.
Yeah.
And that's what, once you in DeFi, you use Frax, period. So as what Sam was saying, is more of these protocols kind of come online. I see them almost operating like DAO MOs, where they can actually go in and do some market operations. Like there will be a DAO that would run the Curve AMO, for example, in the future, rather than Frax having to do that in-house. And there'll be DAOs that are just spun up just to manage AMOs for Frax.
Yeah,
right.
I could see that for new AMOs, like novel ones. I feel like ones that already like ones already created. They're already like automated and algorithmic. So like they're already like running as is.
Right. But
like,
I was
thinking, I see what you're saying though.
But maybe even, bro, is like, what if they can compete against some of these AMOs, right? The lending AMO, for example, right now is only done with Aave and was, I think, Fuse previously too. But what if like another protocol can come in and underwrite risk even better than the lending AMO currently does, right?
Well, that's the cool thing, and this is like the argument like why Frax so everybody makes Frax is just wrapped USDC, but I don't believe it, right? It's bigger than that, because we have all these protocol integrations, like what you're talking about, Kiet, of somebody coming in and being able to underwrite better. They probably get added to the gauges. And so by encouraging their users to use Frax over USDC, they can actually pay their users through the gauges of, hey, we're gonna incentivize you to use Frax as a protocol. We're gonna make money from that through the gauges, and then we're gonna pass that on to you, our users. So you're actually getting paid you're getting paid to use a different stablecoin, which I think is something that will exist in perpetuity and is always going to provide a better incentive for people to come and use Frax over something like USDC or Tether.
You guys just made me think of something. So Frax is not backed by USDC. Frax is backed by DeFi.
Exactly.
It's backed by DeFi. Like all these different
correct.
It is backed by DeFi, whether it's like, Curve.
Because think about this thing. Over time, these AMOs' revenue is going to account for a larger and larger portion of the diverse collateralization, right? Like that thing is going to start like outpacing the USDC that we have, or all the hard assets that we have. And where are all these cash flow coming from? DeFi. Across DeFi. Yeah. So that's the bull case. I agree.
Yeah, and I mean the Frax base pool, I mean, is obviously the big catalyst, right? So that's where the most liquidity is, and liquidity is king. I mean, I like for the longest time, and I always said that I was a liquidity maximalist and not a Bitcoin maximalist or ETH maximalist. Like,
oh, me too.
Liquidity is everything. Like, it's the only thing that really matters when you're trying to get in and out of any asset.
I mean, Sam, me and you both you worked on exchange. I used to deal with exchanges. We know like what happens when liquidity dries up. Like markets just stop. Like liquidity is everything. And like, that's when I saw DeFi for the first time and 2 years ago, and I saw Uniswap. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Like you can just like create liquidity like that for any, coin, big, small, blue chip shit coin, like anything can have liquidity with like the right incentives. It made bootstrapping projects that much easier, and it became less of a worry of projects building. It's like, oh no, we have to go get listed on a centralized exchange, like negotiate, pay a fee, like none of that. We can just like, oh, just like listed on Uniswap, SushiSwap, FraxSwap now. Like it's really cool. Like it's like, it's really cool, like kind of that democracy, the egalitarianism of just liquidity that has developed.
Yeah, and you know what's cool about Frax is that there can never be a liquidity crisis with Frax. Yeah,
it is crazy.
like if you don't believe that Frax will never have a liquidity crisis after the biggest, probably the biggest black swan event for stablecoins, for algorithmic stablecoins, like ever in crypto's existence. If you don't believe that after that much stress was put on Frax, that it will always be able to hold the peg into the future, I think you're just crazy. And it's shown that like Frax is battle tested. It can, you know, go through extreme periods of volatility, and Frax is going to be fine. The peg will hold. The AMOs will make sure that there's always liquidity within the markets for anybody of any size to get out. And you know, like Sam said in that like famous Telegram message or quote that he had, it's like it's mathematically impossible for Frax to depeg. Nobody can depeg Frax. Like the way that they built the AMOs has just,
they built it conservatively, honestly. They built, and like that's the problem in so many stable coins is like they think too short term. And I think you're going to see this in our historical precedents that we're going to like go into.
Yeah, Dave's teasing it.
Yeah. But to review, you know, the necessary, what Bobby, ultimately concludes, the necessary conditions for the success of an automated stablecoin is a flexible collateralization ratio and a revenue-driven, but price agnostic operations on chain. And so, like those two things that do not have any bias whatsoever, but just views the market as is and not as like what it wants it to be, and makes decisions on like what the collateralization ratio should be, and like that's how Frax basically works.
Yeah, like leading into the historical precedent. I mean, the things that, like in the Robert Sam's episode, Sam talked about like that all the reserves are on chain, everything is transparent. There's no off-market Frax that's being market made in the sum of like billions of dollars about a fund that we don't have transparency into. We can see every single Frax that's in existence, and we can see all the reserves that are backing all that Frax as well too, unlike what we're going to get into next with Terra.
Yeah, and I just want to, before we jump there, I think Frax is taking, they're not putting the cart in front of the horse. Like they're developing in a very organic and structural way, right? Like what David said about V1 with just a simple mint and redeem, and then V2 kind of building up this massive. At one point, the curve AMO I think was like 1.7 billion.
Yeah, it was it was insane.
It was like that, like AMO works at scale. Like that was what V2 proved. I think that was critical. And then
V3, I would say this is Frax making a play or completing the DeFi trinity of building its own native primitives, whether it's FraxSwap, which has this very specific purpose as a TWAM, and also Frax Lend, which has a very specific purpose as term sheet lending. But we can get into that another time. Let's get into the historical precedent.
Okay. I was initially, when I looked at Luna and UST, like I thought it was kind of a sweet deal. To be completely honest, like everybody else here, I was like, okay, so you have this thing that is 100% backed by this other thing. And then when you're holding the Moon dollars, you can put it into the Moon Bank and get 20%. And I was like, okay, that seems too good to be true. And then the first time when the yield reserve was running out, I was like, okay, the party's over. Now I don't know where you see TFL come in and just top it off for like almost $500 million. I was like, okay, I guess they can do that. So it was a really interesting thing to observe.
I remember in May of 2021 when it depegged, and it wasn't nearly as big. It was only like a few $100 million, and like
14 cents.
I'm just like, oh, they covered their asses there. Cool. And it was interesting seeing, like, I think it's just interesting seeing like every stablecoin like have its time in the sun, and they always just like, what's the story of Icarus, and they fly too close and then they just like
Mhm.
burn. And you just see that with like almost every stable coin for like, they either, the founder gets too cocky, or like there's something wrong with the mechanic, they get too greedy. It's some like ancient Greek, lesson like that's just repeated over and over again why these like stable coins fail. And with Terra, it was just it was insane. It was insane seeing that run up. And then it was also insane, seeing the four pool almost, come to be as well. Which, before that happened, it was definitely like a big moment for algorithmic stablecoins in general. It's just like seeing them written about before Terra blew up, seeing it written about in the New York Times and in Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, like they were really having a moment like, oh wow, like, this could like actually work out, which was cool. Like, but then like the whole like blow up happened, and it felt like a nuclear bomb went off at my neighbor's house. Like that's how I felt that day. Where were you guys when Terra, when like this whole Terra fiasco went down? I just got like back to LA, and I was just like could not stop watching my Twitter timeline. And I'm just like, oh my God, is this thing gonna end? Like, is it gonna save? And then it was just like a roller coaster down.
Yeah, I mean, like coming back to the first DPEG, I mean, Dave, you can probably attest to this as well too. But like one thing that I remember Sam saying like over and over and over again is that the thing that matters most for any stablecoin is its ability to hold a peg in any market conditions. And this is something that like he made very, very clear from the beginning, is that like we're building Frax so that the peg, like it never depegs. Like we're never going to have a depegging event. It's always going to be one. If it goes to 98, or 97 or something, it represents a failure of the system of the thing that we built.
And this goes back to faith, and this goes back into the faith, into the stablecoin.
Yeah. Because like the first time something depegs, like it puts that little seed of doubt in people that, oh, hey, like maybe it's not going to go back up to 100. Maybe I should just sell everything that I have now. And that becomes a self-reinforcing determinant for how the stablecoin implodes, which happened with Terra. And after the first DPEG, I just pulled all of my money out of UST at that point. I was like, if this is how they built it, if they built a stablecoin that is supposed to DPEG in these high volatility environments, that's like the worst thing that you can build, because the time that you need a stablecoin is in high volatility environments. Like you're swapping to stables when the market is crashing, when like shit's hitting the fan, when it's like so bad that you need to get out of one asset into something that you believe is stable. And if you're making something which is built to depeg by, a lot, or even to, in case of Terra, like even to zero, or like in the first one, it went like to down 14 cents. I mean, that doesn't work. I mean, that's not stability. There's no faith in that. People just dump that stable coin for something even safer. So, there's gotta, like the faith is what keeps people from moving out, right? They'll move in, but then they won't move out. And so like, I was never, I went through like ESD, DSD, like share token, which was kind of like, Luna, but not in L1. And so by the time I'd seen every single one of these implode. And so by the time Luna came around, I was like, well, this is just another seniority shares thing. It's going to blow up at some point.
Robert Sams is shaking. He's like, what have I created? What monster did I create? It's like you create dynamite or some shit. Like really useful. You're really powerful, but could be like used for like ultimate creation or ultimate destruction.
Yeah. And who knows? I mean, maybe the Terra team would have figured it out, and maybe it was just a low liquidity event on Curve at the time where they just didn't have enough.
Well, I mean, what happened was they were moving liquidity from the 3 pool to the 4 pool. And I like to call this like the most well-executed conspiracy I've ever seen in my life, from like start to finish. Because usually like it's one thing to pull off a conspiracy, like that's usually the easy part. The hard part is like after it's done, like everyone just like, still like realizing, okay, we gotta like tidy up and close shop, like make sure everything is like all our like, knots are like tied or edge, whatever. Like,
well, I guess Dave, my question would be like, what would have happened if Terra would have had their own Curve AMO? Say they, copied what Frax had done and was able to like put make sure that there's like $5 billion worth of Terra.
I mean, I think that Terra was like building to become more like Frax, and that was pretty evident with their buying of, Bitcoin as 15% collateral. And I think they were going to increase those numbers, whether it was in Bitcoin or some other assets. I believe they were trying to buy other L1s as well, like Avalanche. And I think if Terra were still around, you would just see it, become more and more like Frax. And I think you would see an AMO pop up. I'm not sure if it would be as sound as the Frax AMO. I'm not sure how they would design it. But I think you would see an AMO. But I wanted to finish my point. Yeah, with like the whole Terra thing that depegging that happened. It wasn't like that complicated of an attack, quote unquote. It was just like, oh, like they pulled liquidity out, somebody like depegged it, and it was just like a domino effect. And then like and then no one knows who did it. Like no one knows, like to this day, like there were rumors going around like, oh, was it Citadel? Was it like someone else, this and that? But like nothing's been confirmed. Like usually like where conspiracies fuck up is when it's over and like somebody can't like shut their mouth, or like they don't know how to like close the deal, like whether it's with Julius Caesar and the Ides of March, like all those, Publius and whoever else they like messed up and they couldn't get the support of the people. Or even like modern day, you had like Peter Thiel and Gawker, and like someone found out that it was like Peter Thiel that sued Gawker, and it didn't make Peter Thiel look very good. But like with Curve, they like actually like everyone kept their mouth shut, and it was just like, as someone who like was a political science major in college and like studies this shit, like very well done, very Machiavellian of whoever pulled that off.
Yeah. I mean, they just, everybody, I mean, we see this now after everybody blew up, but everybody was just over leveraged. Everybody was like
incredibly over leveraged.
Incredibly over leveraged.
I mean, there was that famous tweet from Bobby. I mean, not Barry Silbert in June of 2021. He's like, there's so much unchecked leverage in the system. And this was last year. And like I don't think people realized how much unchecked leverage there was until Luna blew up. And then you just see all like the cards fall from 3AC to Celsius to Voyager and whatnot.
The thing that really like hit it for me was when MIM built their DGen box, where they could like print MIM, put it into the anchor, and then rotate it back into MIM, and just you could like leverage that like 10x on their 20% thing. I was like, well, there is definitely, when this needs to unwind, it is not going to be pretty, and it wasn't. Like
it's called a DGen box, literally. Go put your money in the DGen box. But like honestly, if you're like a on-chain fund manager and you see that deal, like you're kind of obligated to take that. You know, you're like literally. I mean, like you should hedge yourself, of course, but you're obligated to take that.
And then I want to highlight the third point on this list of Bobby's. I don't think we touched upon is like the inorganic or not fundamental demand. What I feel is, the same argument could be said against Frax. Right? Nobody wants to hold Frax except for yield farming purposes. But what I think I want to highlight is that although there are no organic demand to hold or transact in Frax, the Frax protocol itself owns a ton of the Frax versus, for the TFL side, I don't think they control as large a percent of the supply as Frax does, so that no matter what happens, the peg cannot break, because Frax owns its own liquidity and its own supply as well.
Yeah,
that peg is unbreakable because of that.
It's like the Frax itself is bootstrapping, that demand for Frax.
Correct.
In the future.
Frax's demand for Frax.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Fed. It's literally the Fed like performing open market operations in real life. Like the Fed needs to like bootstrap the US economy, so it will do certain things within the economy to spur activity. And Frax is doing the same thing. It's like, okay, first you need like a place with a bunch of liquidity. Boom, you have Curve, and then it's like, and then everything can flow from there. In the future, you're going to see more use cases, like for sure. I mean, you already see small, like not small, but like different ones on chain. Like, the other day, like I used Perpetual Protocol to do a short on ETH. And I was just like, I could do it in Frax. I'm just like, wait, what? I can use like Frax collateral. This is great. And so I did it. And I'd like to thank JPow for helping me there.
And the funny thing there is like the US government is like the largest users of US dollars, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So you expect Frax to be the largest users of Frax.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing to remember is that we're only 18 months into the Frax protocol
Mhm.
being like live and
Yep.
working. And it's gone through a decollateralization event of over $1.5 billion going out. It's held the peg the entire time. It's shown that it can harvest revenues from pretty much every single DeFi protocol in existence and bring it back to Frax as profits for VFX holders. And it's just shown the strength of the model during the time. It's only been it's 18 months. 18 months. It's
And
so
just-
short. Like what are we going to be saying in 10 years when of development, right? Like we're just barely touching the surface. Like the core product of the AMOs has just been built. I mean, that's like less than a year old. And everything else that about like using Curve and integrating with Convex, I mean, that's like 6 to 7 months, 8 months of use so far. Like there's going to be more versions of Convex. There's going to be more versions of Curve on different platforms. Like the ability for Frax to get in and integrate with every single one of those systems and generate like real organic yield.
Real yield.
Yeah, real yield. Yeah. And it is the biggest thing that we have going for us. And you just think about like how much, like with the growth that we're having, you know, where are we going to be in 10 years? You know, if we're at like a billion and something now, like could we get to?
I think in 10 years it's more about FPI than Frax. Ultimately, that's the goal. It's more about the Frax price index than Frax the stablecoin.
Well, I mean, but can Frax hit $100 billion could we hit $1 trillion of reserves in Frax in 10 years? Or like, I think 100 billion is reasonable. Probably a trillion.
I think we hit 100 billion in 5 years by next cycle. Yeah. I mean, like DeFi, it's kind of crazy to think how small DeFi is right now, like how minuscule it is. And once like the proper on-ramps and once the capital gets into DeFi and once, organic yield opportunities, are identified and, taken advantage of, like, then you're just going to see, I wonder if you're going to see like more like more of like a hockey stick growth or more just like a gradual growth, kind of like how tech stocks were for the past 20 years.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, is like if we exist for 10 years and we're going to get to, like $100 billion, does most of that 80 come in the last like 2 years, or do we just grow?
I think it depends on the use case. Cause like with the Curve AMO, you saw like it hockey stick. So there might be some use case where, boom, it goes from like 2 billion to 100 billion, but like, who knows?
I think it's just like payments. Like, I think it's going to be like lending and then also payments infrastructure as well too. Like,
and I'm thinking of like all the cool stuff that can be created with like Fraxland. Like you can create your own Degen box with Fraxland basically, and like do your own like, winding up and, yield experiments. And also like having other projects and other protocols build yield strategies on top, utilizing Frax, identifying them on chain and utilizing the tools in the Frax toolbox, basically, whether it's Fraxland or FraxSwap to execute those strategies. There's a huge design space there that is like yet to be taken advantage of. And I think sooner rather than later, you're going to see protocols realize like, wait a second, like, Curve is popping off, Convex is popping off. Like, what can we do with Frax? And they're the currency liquidity, the currency layer of it all.
Do you think that Frax moves towards like the Euro model where anybody can come and build AMOs and deploy them as long as they've gotten like a code review, and then the builder gets a portion of like all future revenues?
That's a great question. I could see that happening. I think it depends on, you would have to like develop like a process of creating an AMO. I'm not sure how like Yearn's strategies work. The thing is like, I don't think there's like enough AMOs right now, like out there, but like, or they're just, people aren't actually, I'd take that back. There aren't enough people thinking about building AMOs because the opportunities are out there. It's just a matter of building them. And I think it will be a lot easier to create these strategies with Fraxland because like, I know building AMOs is a very intensive process, but like getting Fraxland approved is not. You can just like, I think you're more likely to see like strategies built and approved than AMOs built and approved.
Already like Frax has some of the smartest minds coming in and building on it, and they're not even on the core team, right? You look at like the Fraxmas channel, or you look at who's like Bobby, who's writing reports. Like there's some really smart people who just gravitate towards towards
Yeah.
Frax because they like it. They like the system and they see the
I mean,
opportunity of.
I'm looking at
being part of it.
my two other co-hosts right now.
Yeah.
I definitely think for the bull case for Frax for me is like having debt, like all of DeFi's debt denominated in Frax.
Absolutely.
I think that would be like the best case scenario, and Fraxland is definitely the step towards that. But let's take a look at this iron finance thing.
I have the
Iron.
funniest story with Iron, because like Iron.
Me too. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh my
go
god!
ahead, David.
I mean, Iron is a fork of Frax, which
A
is
V1
V1,
Frax, not even like
V1
yeah,
Frax. Yeah. And actually, like there was that very famous article by Mark Cuban in Forbes saying like, I'm pool 3, Iron Dai, I'm making so much money, yeah. And then he just gets rugged and then like goes and complains like there needs to be regulation. But like a lot of people don't know this, but in 2019, Sam went to Mark Cuban and like pitched Frax to Mark Cuban in 2019. And Mark Cuban was like, what is this? I don't see this like ever like doing anything. Like what? And like he didn't understand DeFi yet. Obviously he gets DeFi now, and like I'm sure he would make a different decision, but it's just kind of like ironic that he like passed on Frax, goes in with the fork, and then gets rugged by the fork, wrecked by the fork. But I still love and respect Mark Cuban, but like, man, you can't just like go like complain for regulation after you get rugged. Like it's all part of the game, man.
The thing about Iron is like it wasn't the first Frax fork. There was a lot of Frax forks that came before Iron, and you know what? None of them worked. Like there's a couple of things about Frax that makes it what it is. First of all, like it's the base, right? Typically, if like all the forks usually suck, they usually fail, and then people just go back to the base. It's like the whole Bitcoin maximalist argument. I don't want to get too much into that, but the second part is that like the thing that I saw, especially for V1, which no other of these projects did that were trying to copy Frax, is like none of them had locked liquidity. Like if you go back and look at Iron, like none of their liquidity was locked. Like all of the Titan token totally unlocked. So as soon as it blew up, everybody just pulled their liquidity. It went to zero within like an hour. And that was mostly the issue for all the other Frax forks, is that like by one of the things that Frax was able to do really successfully was grow their LP pool of like 4-year locked people of locking up Frax and Frax shares. You look at the growth chart, it's just a treadmill going up and up and up as time goes on. Like there was never a time, I think it's even growing now. Like there's never really been a time where people have stopped like either compounding their returns back into the Frax pool or just buying Frax and then adding it as Frax shares LP. So like the fact that like no other projects really have this locked liquidity, I think it's detrimental to them. Like Frax has like hundreds of millions of dollars of locked liquidity that's locked not just for like a month or two, but like for years and years. And I think that really matters at the end of the day for the project.
And it shows how long-term aligned people are with the project. And a lot of them are locked for 4 years. Like I know I am personally. And also I was going to say like to build something like Frax, because like DeFi is tough enough, but like you get into stablecoins and automated stablecoins, you have to be a madman to build in that, because success is binary. It's 1 to 0. Like you have to be more than a dev. You have to be an economist. You have to understand how monetary policy works. You have to understand how markets work. You have to have such like this peripheral view of like both economics and how like life on chain works. Like it takes like a certain type of person and certain type of team to build in that environment. And Frax has proven itself over and over and over again.
And like it's interesting looking back on these projects now, especially I mean UST is really the outlier, because like I didn't really think it was going to fail until it did. You could look at the model and say, oh hey, depegged once, but it doesn't mean it would do it again. For something like Iron Finance, like it's just trying to be what Frax is, but it's not.
I remember there was like a whole trend of algo stables like that, like month on Polygon. There was Malt. There was Malt.
Oh no, Malt was great. Malt is great. I don't want to hear any Malt slander.
No. I'm not slandering Malt. It was like fun, honestly. I was just like, what is going on? What do you mean? I'm just like trading like straight up like Malt for Dai. Like people, I think people were tired off of malt. I swear to God, but like, I just like, I don't know what happened. Like with, I know malt isn't listed on here, and malt isn't.
Oh, they relaunched.
they
There's Malt
relaunched?
I heard
V2.
that,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
Malt V2, and they had some issues. I think there's going to be Malt V3, but
I mean, I
Give
just
us one
love
more
that.
rug.
Yeah.
One more rug.
I mean, yeah, granted that all these are rugs, I kind of like that everyone's just still experimenting. I think even though Frax is like kind of so far ahead and also have proven that it could scale up to like the $1 billion range, like I still like to see these experimentations.
yeah.
Because it pushes the space forward as much as it also rugs us in the process.
Yeah.
No, I
'Cause,
agree.
you know,
I think we should
it's- you gotta-
encourage experimentation for sure.
Yeah, and you got to battle test. I mean, like you can the thing about Senior Share's paper is that like Robert made this paper in an academic setting where he could think in like there's not going to be anybody trying to blow it up, right? But in crypto, everybody's trying to extract the most amount of value in the most competitive environment from everybody else, and so that your design principles have to be like ironclad, or somebody somewhere is going to figure out how to exploit something and make an insane amount of profits, and then everybody else is going to lose.
Yeah, I say that we're all guinea pigs and beta users in this. Like, I feel like every day, even every time I like click something on chain, like I realize like how like you just don't know like what sometimes like what if like the front end gets hacked. Sometimes you don't know if you're interacting with like the right contract. Like there's so many times, like so many people, like even people that are quote unquote experienced that like get their like wallets just nabbed. And we're all beta users, and like I don't think this thing will get to mainstream adoption until that stuff gets figured out.
Yeah, it's too adversarial. Like I can't imagine. My mom trying to log in and be like, "Oh, nah, this is a phishing website. I recognize it because that's a capital I, not an L." Like I don't ever see my mom being able to spot something like that, right? And that's exactly what they do to you. So I feel, for this space to really move forward, we got to stop with the adversarial shit. But unfortunately, that's just the name of the game.
That's just Moloch rearing his head.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that like Frax has existed in the most adversarial environment with some of the most extreme volatility for 18 months now, and has just functioned incredibly well. No depegs, everything is done really well. No hacks, no loss of funds. Other protocols have lost Frax for us, but we haven't lost anybody's reserves yet. And that's I think the biggest, I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that like at the end of the day, Frax is going to be the only one remaining. You
just gotta survive,
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess we can go to the takeaways and what Bobby plans to go into in the future and what we plan to discuss in the future. And the two, main conditions to judge success of an automated stablecoin are its diverse collateralization and how it acts within a market, and also how sustainable it is with that like one part of the collateralization, which is cash flow. That's how I view it. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yep, agreed. I just don't know how you do the underwriting of the cash flow though, right? You must choose a discount rate that is acceptable to the risk relative to like everything you're taking.
And like sometimes people have like different like variables and assumptions, and then this and that. So it's gonna be what Bobby chooses to do in the future.
Remember, not all revenue are created equal.
That's true. But I mean, but how much of a difference in variance are we talking about here? I mean, like looking at a like, I don't know. I don't know what else to judge it by in the same sense, because there really is no other product like this.
Well, just compare it to AMOs, right, Sam? Like for the Curve AMO, like we get paid in 3 ways, right? The Curve AMO gets paid via CRV rewards, CVX rewards, and base fees. So those are the 3 revenue types, right? But the CRV could get discounted differently from the CVX, which is differently discounted from the base fee, and then versus say the lending AMO, where we're actually straight up getting interest payments, right, in Frax. So like that right there is a slightly different underwriting of risk, right? The discount rate for that revenue would be lower because we know
I
it's
cannot
real.
wait for Fraxland. I think that's gonna be such a game
Yeah.
changer. Like, I think that's the thing I'm most excited for. That and actually FPI. Like I think FPI is the most underrated, underappreciated, not talked about thing.
So what you're saying is that you should go all in on FPIS.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying.
Good.
I mean,
I see.
as a concept itself, like it actually, I think it accomplishes Satoshi's dream of just what would, a currency.
You mean
look
Satoshi's
like.
vision?
Satoshi's, I refuse.
Nice.
Next. But no, I mean, like really though, like Satoshi's like, how can we create like a monetary system independent of government? How can we separate money and state? And, with blockchain and smart contracts, it gives us the tools to do that in ways like not thought imaginable. And FPI, I think, is a continuation of these efforts of like, of that. Exactly. First it was like Bitcoin, but then it went from being digital cash to digital gold. And then you have like the ETH is money narrative, which is like, I can understand parts of it, but you can't have a volatile asset for like everyday things. And I would expect in the future for NFTs to be paid in stablecoins, but we'll see. Who knows? But I think like something like FPI, where it's like you're hedging inflation is brilliant. And then over time you can, create your own inflation index and, create your own monetary policy that isn't just the CPI. You can, base it off of like, oh, maybe we can take an Amazon API on that endpoint. Maybe we can take a cars.com API endpoint. You can basically construct your own inflation index and create your own currency that way. And you can have it for different regions.
For me, I love FPI as a concept, but I think in execution is extremely difficult because how do you kind of guarantee a fixed, like you're guaranteeing a yield without having guaranteed yields.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is a problem. It's an interesting problem to solve.
Yeah.
But I think it's a lofty goal worth striving for as well.
Like I said, I'm open for all experimentation, right? And keep on innovating. And
I think what you guys are touching on is that like the thing that Frax has, which you can make the bull case over and over and over again, is like this giant toolbox of just awesome things that keeps getting at it. Like maybe FPI works out, maybe it doesn't. Maybe the AMOs work, right? Already. Maybe Fraxland works, maybe it doesn't. Like who knows? But the thing is like the team just keeps on building and shipping and our toolbox of things that we can use to integrate with the market just keeps on getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So like whether FPI or any of the other ones actually become the dominant provider of income, 5-10 years down the road, we don't know that, but at least for now, we know that there's a suite of tools that we can try to figure out which one has product market fit.
Yeah, I can see for FPI off the bat, like DAOs, hedging their treasuries with FPI once that's figured out. But I agree. I'm sure like this is something Bobby should write about in the future.
Yeah. Also I think for the next one of these that we do, these breakdowns, I think we should be more critical of Frax. I feel like we're very Frax biased lately.
I mean, I think it's
I think we need to switch it up and bring some spicy takes.
I think
against Frax.
I think for the first episode, it's okay to be bullish or Frax bullish because this is establishing the framework, and I think we can all agree that like Frax fits the framework well as is. But I think like in later episodes, as we like look into the details of like fully, how is it like fully backed, or like how does it account for revenue, like there will be opportunities to be critical and not so shilly jilly. So
yes.
But I disagree. I don't think the argument is like is the peg gonna hold. I don't think that's the argument. I think the argument is rather like, can Frax find product market fit in whatever space we're in DeFi, in real world assets, and something else? Like is it something that people are going to keep on their balance sheets or like use for their treasuries or do like all the things that we talked about? Like are other people going to use Frax? That's the main question.
I guess like my question for you guys is like, how do you think we can get more outside people excited about Frax? Because it's like Frax, I feel like right now, if you're in it, if you're like deep in it, you're like super excited about it like us. But like to like, everyday like DeFi users and crypto users that, see like a million different tokens showed on their timeline. Like FXS just looks like another token. So it's just like, how do you attract like the right, I feel like Frax is doing it like slowly but surely. It's kind of like how it evolved technologically with the development of AMOs. It's doing the same thing with community, with like the members that it's attracting and kind of the different activities that community members are undergoing, whether it's creating dashboards or even creating podcasts and content like this. But like, I guess, like, how do you think like Frax can attract more adoption and community members? Like, is it like branded, or that's not baseball?
Baseball. And I'm gonna be at at Stablecoin. I'm gonna get up on stage and do like Steve Ballmer, like baseball.
We need to get all the stablecoin goals cutouts for stablecoins.
Yes.
And it's just have them on the stage. That'd be so funny. Anyway,
because talking about it, like it's incentives for people to pair their token against the baseball. Like, you're paying, it's triple down economics, where you're paying people, or the Frax protocol is incentivizing other protocols to pair against Frax, which, the sky's the limit when it comes there. And then, by the base pool existing along with that other asset of some third-party protocol, now all their users are exposed to Frax, whether they want to or not. And they're going to have to trade with it somehow. And then maybe they just start holding it, and then it just grows from there. So like the base pool. Yeah.
I think we start at the DAO level. Like Frax needs to own the DAO market, all the DAO to DAO kind of operations. Like that is what Frax's fit is on. And then it should, like Sam said, trickle down to the community members of each of those DAOs. Because DAOs are sticky, man. Like once they kind of use your product or buy your token or whatever, like there's a switching cost to them. And so I think we go after the DAOs before the consumers.
Yeah, I think like as like Frax evolves as a protocol, like how like Maker has different units. Like I can see Frax having units like like a DAO focused unit focused on doing DAO BD. A governance focused unit that can be like, oh, like this is how like Frax can improve like its inner governance, this and that. And so I can see like different units evolving as like the protocol evolves and gets bigger, because as it scales, like it's, the battle never ends. There's always gonna be, a new obstacle to overcome and to solve. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're building. And does anybody, I guess to conclude, does anybody have any final thoughts?
I'm very excited. The Fraxmas community has been great. It's growing, and like just from the people that we've had on the different episodes over the past couple of times, like it's really been like, these are like big brain people coming on.
Honestly, I can't keep up with them. Like I try. I'm just like, they're really good at what they're doing. I just want to get them all in like one group chat in one room, and they can just like go off and spar against each other, and I'll just like go and eat popcorn and watch.
I feel like on the Flywheel pod, sometimes after Dave and I ask our questions, we will sit there for a good like 15 seconds just mulling over the answers to digest. And then everyone's just kind of waiting for us to ask the next question. We're like, wait, hold on, we're still digesting. Give it a second.
It's very meaty, very dense.
Super dense.
Yeah, no, I'm just super excited to just creating content, pumping out content. And I love how we started this like in like the quote unquote beginning of the bear, in the beginning of the great unwinding. And I think like a big reason for that was when Luna and Terra collapsed, like I didn't want to see like Frax get wrapped into that narrative. And like, I have to give a shout out to Raid, right? Like really pushed me to saying like, yo, like we got to take control of the narrative with Frax. And like, this is how like Flywheel came about. And like really thankful for you guys to come along. Like could not have done this without you. And we'll keep it rolling. So thanks for everyone for tuning in. So what should we call this? Like, should we call this Fraxcast?
I was about to ask.
Should we call it Fraxcast?
Fraxcast.
Yeah, that was the original name for the podcast. But like, I think this is more fit, Fraxcast. Yeah.
I've always loved that name, so no complaints.
Fraxcast. This is the first episode of Fraxcast, in the books. Thanks everyone for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, to our YouTube channel, Flywheel. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, at Flywheel Pod, Telegram channel at Flywheel Pod. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFi Dave22.
You can follow me at 0x_K.
And I'm traders_insight. So
thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Peace.